Number 10. The Hartley violin. While this may seem like just a photo of an old violin, the story behind it is incredibly significant. This is because the instrument managed to survive the sinking of the Titanic. We all know the story of the ship that hit the iceberg and sank, so let me tell you the story of Wallace Henry Hartley. Hartley was the band leader on the Titanic, and the violin was an engagement gift from his fiancée before he took off on the journey. He was one of the players who stood on the deck of the ship and played music while it sank, attempting to calm the frightened passengers as they boarded lifeboats. Hartley was found 2 weeks later, clutching the case that was strapped to his body. Inside it was his violin, still in good condition thanks to the case protecting it from the water and cold. It went on to be the most valuable Titanic artifact ever sold, selling at auction for $1.7 million. It is now displayed at a history museum in Branson, Missouri, going on to survive long after it played its final notes on the ship.
In our number 9 spot, we have the woman in the attic. Well, the story behind this picture is extremely chilling, so chilling that I definitely threw on some show tunes and sang for a moment after reading about it. In case you're curious, Wicked is always my musical of choice. Speaking of Wicked, this was not planned, I swear. The woman in this photograph is a real woman who had a wicked mother who locked her in an attic for 25 years. An anonymous tip to the authorities in 1901 was how she was found, 55 pounds in a room filled with feces, old meat, and insects. Thankfully, she was okay health-wise, but mentally, as you can expect, not so much. This is a photo of her and how she was found. Truly horrible to see. While looking at this photograph and seeing her long brown hair, I'm now convinced that this is where Disney got some of their inspiration for the movie Tangled. There are way too many similarities that I'm sure they took and made 1,000 times more light and cheery. In our number 8 spot, we have For Sale. This is a photograph from 1948 that honestly at first glance I thought it to be some kind of joke. Maybe the young ones in the photograph were being bad and the mom was threatening to sell them. You know, the old tricks parents would play when children's aid wasn't a phone call away. Anyways, apparently this is a picture of something very real that was happening due to poverty at the time, and that instantly makes the picture chilling and sad. Apparently the mother and father of these young ones, Mr. and Mrs. Chelifo, needed money desperately, and so they sold them. It was said that the mother was paid to stage this photo, and perhaps that is why there is an air of phoniness to it, but no later than 2 years after all of their young ones had been sold to families. In our number 7 spot, we have On the Brink of Death. A man by the name of Robert Overacker decided that he wanted to raise awareness for the homeless. And how was he going to do it? Oh, by doing a stunt that would attract the masses. He was going to jet ski over Niagara Falls. And this is a picture of him doing just that. This was the last picture of him taken as he fell to his death, as his parachute did not open as planned. Apparently one of the police officers at the Niagara area has said that it would have been like hitting cement as he fell 180 feet. Wow. What a haunting photo to look at. He was only 39 as well. This is why I will never skydive because, well, there isn't a 100% survival rate, so there's that. Also, I'm a chicken, so there's also that. In our number 6, we have the two-headed dog. I always feel like puking when I see this photo. It is just the most inhumane thing ever, and it makes my heart hurt to look at. This is a photo that was taken in the 50s of the Soviet scientist Vladimir Demikhov and his science experiment, the two-headed dog. He beheaded the head off of one of the dogs and attached it to the other dog. He sewed their circulatory systems together and connected their vertebrae with plastic strings, and after the surgery was completed, both of the heads could hear, see, smell, and act as a normal dog would. The dog survived only 4 days before passing away. This scientist's research led to the creation of transplants, but wow, was this a horrible thing to have done. Also, he apparently only did this experiment due to boredom, so perhaps my anger stems from having learned that. In our number 5 spot, we have Mary Reeser. This is a picture of a blown up Mary Reeser. This picture showcased quite the story from its time. On July the 2nd of 1951 in St. Petersburg, Florida, a woman by the name of Mary Reeser somehow caught fire, and all that remained was a part of her skull and her left leg surrounded surrounded by her ashes. She was discovered by her landlady, and after the investigation, the police were unable to say as to how she could have possibly caught fire. It was this story where the idea of spontaneous human combustion was theorized, but scientists today say that they are almost certain that this could not be the case. But what is weird is that most of her house was largely devoid of fire damage, so it makes no sense. I suppose we shall never know, and this picture will continue to scare us till the end of time. In our number 4 spot, we have the truck stop killer. In the 70s, there was a killer by the name of Robert Ben Rhodes who would pick up while he was driving his commercial truck across America, and then he would kill them. He was suspected to have taken the life of over 50 women. Anyways, when he was finally caught, a picture of a girl named Regina K. Walters was found along with many other photos of women inside Robert's home. This photo is believed to be taken right before he killed Regina. Man, oh man, how horrible. This is quite chilling to look at. Sometimes I'm so surprised when evidence like this is leaked to the public. This must have been haunting for her family and friends to see. In our number 3 spot, we have the Radium Girls. This is another chilling photo of a girl that was a part of the Radium Girls, which were a number of women known for working at factories in the 20s where they were exposed to so much radium that they actually would come home glowing in the dark. Unfortunately, the prolonged exposure caused them to have a series of problems, such as their jaws began to swell up and fell off, their vertebrae would collapse, and eventually they passed of cancer. So knowing that this is a pic of one of those women makes this picture so much worse than it looks. However, it does already look like a scary picture of a woman in pain. Pretty scary to think about the amount of people working in factories today or working with technology that might bring about future death that we haven't been able to predict yet. In our number 2 spot, we have ANNELIESE MICHEL. Yeah, this picture will definitely give you the heebie-jeebies even without knowing the backstory. But what if I told you that this is a pic of a woman that was believed to be possessed by the devil? Yeah, this photo just got 100 times scarier, didn't it? Yeah, well, this is a photo of a young lady by the name of Anneliese, and she was a pretty devout Catholic German and grew up in the 60s. She was completely normal until she suddenly started hallucinating, eating spiders, routinely convulsing, and just drinking her own urine. She claimed that the devil was possessing her, and she would later go on to have 67 exorcisms. Nothing worked, and she ended up passing away from malnutrition at the age of 23. Her tale is what inspired the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Yep, deeply chilling. In our number 1 spot, we have the Pioneer's Defense. Save the best for last. This is probably one of the creepiest photos that I have ever seen. This is a historical image taken by the Russian photographer Viktor Bula in 1937. If it isn't creepy enough without the explanation, here's the explanation. These are people that were part of a Soviet youth group called the Young Pioneers, and they are wearing gas masks because they were in the middle of a military preparation drill, as this was during a time when Joseph Stalin was the dictator and no one knew if death was around the corner. Yikes. Sometimes I am so thankful to be alive right now. Even though it does seem as if we're going through a bit of a mental war in this day and age, a physical war is way scary to think about being a part of.
In our number 10 spot today, we have John Lennon. Of course, we all know John Lennon as one part of the Beatles who went on after they disbanded to have a very successful solo career. Lennon was not only a musician, but also a peace activist who was strongly anti-war. He was not afraid to display his activism and held a 2-week anti-war demonstration. There was a period of 3 years where the Nixon administration was trying to have him deported for his criticism against the Vietnam War. On December 8th, 1980, Lennon was leaving the Dakota apartment complex when he was stopped by a man named Mark David Chapman. Lennon signed an autograph for Mark, which is what is happening in this photo, and then Lennon went on his way. Little did he know, Mark was going to shoot him later that night. Once Lennon returned to the apartment complex, Mark was there waiting for him to commit his crime. Mark has said he did it mostly for the attention, which is so horrifying, but Mark is also a very religious man who explained that Lennon once saying that the Beatles were more famous than Jesus is what really pushed him to commit this crime. It is very crazy that this photo was captured when Lennon was being kind to who he thought was a fan, and no one could have predicted what would happen just a few hours later.
Number 9. Big Island Hiker. In 2015, Dalen Pua decided to go on a hike in Hawaii. He told his grandmother he was going to be hiking the Stairway to Heaven Trail, which his grandmother warned against as this was a prohibited area. While on his hike, he posted several pictures to social media. Most seemed to be normal, just showing off the view. However, in one photo, you can see a man amongst the trees, following behind Dalen. While a mysterious man in the woods is creepy enough, it gets worse, as Dalen unfortunately never returned from his hike, and to this day, he has never been found. His family studied the pictures closely, trying to find any clues to his whereabouts, and when they spotted the figure, they started to wonder if maybe he had been responsible for Dalen's disappearance. People wonder why this person has not come forward, wondering if it's because he was involved, or he was just scared of being caught hiking on an illegal trail. The search for Dalen consisted of the fire department, local volunteers, drone operators, and even the US Navy, and unfortunately, nothing has ever been found. Number 8. Trails in the Snow. Another hiking photo, this one comes from a mountain in the Karakoram Himalaya. Greatly accomplished mountaineer Kurt Diemberger was accompanied by his friend Herman Buhl. Buhl had been excited about the expedition, wanting to complete the hike in only 3 days. The photo that Diemberger took seems to be normal, a photo of their tracks on the snowy mountain. However, when you look closely, you can see that one of the tracks does not continue, instead falling off the side. This is because Diemberger took this photo after Herman Buhl fell off the side of the mountain. Retreating from a snowstorm, Buhl stepped off to the side, triggering a massive avalanche, and fell almost 900 meters down the slope, never to be seen again. Diemberger notes how in this situation they had not been roped together, which would have been considered a mistake in any other scenario. In this case, however, he says that if they were tied together, that he would have been pulled down, becoming lost in the avalanche with his friend as well. He went on to say that he would never attempt that mountain again, as without Buhl, there is no point. Number 7. Basketball card. By all accounts, this appears to be a regular NBA hoops card, showcasing Mike Jackson from the Knicks. However, if you look at the two young men on the left, you will realize that they are actually the Menendez brothers, Eric and Lyle. If you're not familiar, the Menendez brothers were from a wealthy family and were found guilty of killing their parents after they had allegedly mistreated them. The two weren't immediately caught and went on a spending spree and apparently watched a New York Knicks game. That's right, this photo was actually taken after the crime and before they had been arrested. After the discovery of the card, the Daily Mail was actually able to contact Lyle Menendez in San Diego prison, where both brothers are housed. He said, "It's amazing that somebody spotted it," also commenting on the haunting period that took place after the crime and before the arrest, saying that they went to a lot of Knicks games before, so going to one after wouldn't have been that extravagant. The cards are now available on eBay, usually going for about $5 to $10. Number 6. Rodney ALCALA. During the 1970s, a famous game show aired called The Dating Game. The purpose of this show is for one woman to speak to 3 hidden men, asking them questions. By the end of the show, she chooses the one she wants to go on a date with, and after the show, they go. 17-year-old Leanne Leadham appeared on the show with her 3 eligible bachelors, one of which was Rodney ALCALA. The show goes fine and nothing seems too out of the ordinary, Rodney even being selected as the man she would go on a date with. What viewers and producers of the show didn't know was that when Rodney was sitting on that chair, he had already committed 4 murders. It's eerie to watch the episode with the hindsight of what had happened. Luckily for Leanne, she changed her mind and never actually went on the date with Rodney, only having a photo shoot together. It makes you wonder just how many other people you've seen on TV or in photos who are actually hiding a terrible secret. Number 5. Autograph. This photo from 1980 isn't all too concerning. It shows John Lennon signing an autograph. The reality of it, however, is that he was signing an autograph for Mark Chapman, the man who merely a few hours later would kill him as he returned home from a recording studio. Chapman had approached Lennon with a fairly rare record, asking Lennon to sign it for him. Lennon then asked, "Is that all?" To which Chapman replied with, "No." Chapman says that at the time this picture was taken, he actually had the weapon in his pocket, but had chickened out of committing the crime at this time. He then went back to Lennon's apartment where he waited for several hours, reading Catcher in the Rye. Finally, as John returned home from the recording studio with tapes under his arms, Chapman shot him. He returned to reading his book until a security guard arrived, the man in tears asking if Mark realized what he had done. Mark was justly sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Space Crew. In this photo, we see the smiling faces of 7 astronauts posing in zero gravity. Unfortunately, as with most things on this list, this story does not have so happy an ending. That's because this is the crew of the Columbia Space Shuttle. The crew spent 24 hours a day in 2 different shifts doing various different experiments in life sciences, material sciences, fluid physics, and others. Eventually, they were ready to return home to Earth in 2003. However, their re-entry would prove disastrous. On launch, it was discovered that a piece of foam had broken off and left a hole in the left wing. This hole allowed atmospheric gases to get into the ship eventually completely breaking apart. NASA suspended any shuttle flights for at least 2 years as they investigated, and were apparently criticized as the issue with foam that caused the disaster had been previously known by the organization. This led to the retirement of the space shuttle fleet, astronauts now making their way to the International Space Station by means of Russian rockets or the SpaceX Space Taxi service. Number 3. The Oscars. This photo is of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. It shows the 2 men celebrating as they had just won an Oscar. They had written the lyrics and music for The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin, and in this photo, they were receiving the award for The Little Mermaid. While they seem excited, if you look closely at Howard Ashman on the left, it seems like something is wrong. That night, Ashman told Menken that when they got back to New York, they needed to have a serious talk. 2 days later, they returned and they spoke. Howard told Alan that he had been diagnosed with late-stage AIDS and didn't have much longer to live. Menken says he recalls Ashman saying, "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't know how Disney would react. Here I am, a gay man, and I'm working on a movie for kids, and I didn't want to be fired." As Disney found out, they instead did everything they could to allow him to continue to work on Beauty and the Beast, even packing up their storyboards and going to his home in New York. Howard later died in 1991 with a long list of accomplishments behind him. Number 2. Memorial photos. These photos look like any other historical portrait. An important fact to note about taking pictures in the olden days was that it took a long time. Like a really long time. I'm talking hours. There was definitely no quick selfie taking back then. Because of this, it was common for the subjects in photos to appear a bit blurry, because you can't expect people to be able to keep perfectly still. But if you look closely at those photos, you'll probably notice that some of the subjects are incredibly clear. Were they just masters of staying still? Well, you could say that since some of the people in these photos aren't alive. And I don't just mean because it's been so long that they've passed away by now, I mean they aren't alive in the photos. Doing this was actually incredibly common back then and seen as a way to memorialize your loved ones and help lessen grief. It is commonly referred to as post-mortem photography, and the people in the photos were often propped up on stands in order to be held in place. Number 1. Genie. This may look like the portrait of a normal little girl, but the truth of her story is the exact opposite of normal. Genie Wiley is well known as one of the most popular examples of a feral child, and this is a photo of her. She had been kept tied to a chair for the majority of her childhood, not allowed to speak or cry, her father having often barked and growled at her like a dog. She became an important look into how the minds of children are shaped and how important it is to learn from a young age. While she learned some words, it seems that she never fully learned how to speak properly. Although she couldn't speak, she seemed to be learning quickly, and she actually performed well on intelligence tests. She learned to draw, dress herself, and enjoy music. While she was incredibly popular and widely discussed, no one knows exactly where she is now. She's apparently in an adult foster care home somewhere in California, now over 60 years old.
In our number 10 spot, we have the Moko Mokai collection. Well, we are starting off strong with a truly scary and disturbing photo. This is a photograph of a man named Major General Horatio Gordon Robley, who had a collection of 35 heads that he stole from the native Maori people. Apparently in New Zealand, there were people called Maori that preserved the heads of fallen people. The heads were chopped off, boiled, smoked, dried in the sun, and then dipped in a shark oil before being displayed like a trophy. Whoa. They are known as the Moko Mokai. Anyways, these heads were robbed by the British when they moved into New Zealand, and this pic is one of the guys who stole them. Honestly, the man feels just as chilling to look at as the heads. Does anyone else agree? It's probably because he's holding something that looks like it could be a sharp object that might have helped in the chopping process. I don't know, could be just me.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Stanford Prison Experiment. This photo comes from 1971 during the Stanford Prison Experiment. For those of you who aren't familiar with this experiment, it started on August 14th, 1971 and was led by university psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. The experiment took student volunteers and divided them into 2 groups. One group of prisoners and one group of guards, and they placed all of the volunteers into a fake prison that was created for the experiment. The experiment aimed to see if and how quickly humans would turn evil under the right conditions with the right amount of power. Basically, it was just to try and answer the question of if humans are inherently good or inherently evil. I think everyone was shocked with the results. After only 6 days, the experiment needed to be concluded because the guards began absolutely tormenting the prisoners. It really showed the kinds of things humans can be capable of even after such a short time. This photo is definitely reminiscent of that experiment and serves as our reminder. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Pioneer's Defense. This photo is known as the Pioneer's Defense, and man, does it ever look creepy. This photo comes from 1937 and was taken by a Russian photographer named Viktor Bula. This photo takes place in the Leningrad area, which is now known as St. Petersburg, which is the 2nd largest city in Russia. The people in this photo were a part of a group that was the 1930s Russian equivalent of our Boy Scouts, which was called the Young Pioneers. The masks on their faces leave a very eerie feeling, and for a fair reason. These people were doing a military preparation drill, which is the reason for the gas masks. This photo was taken during a time when the country was under the dictatorship of Joseph Stalin, and the residents were constantly unsure of what was going to happen. The country was already seeing death, and people were already frightened just a few years before the start of World War II. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Stanley Hotel. This is a photo of the Stanley Hotel, which is the hotel that inspired the famous Stephen King novel, The Shining. This hotel was under construction in the early 1900s and saw a fateful day in 1911. There was an unexplained explosion that happened in room 217. In the explosion, a chambermaid was seriously injured, but she ended up surviving and actually returning to work. A few years later, she passed away, and ever since her passing, there have been tons of guests who swear they saw her ghost. Guests have said that they have seen her around the halls of the hotel, but the place that gets the most paranormal activity is of course room 217. This is the room where Stephen and his wife stayed for one terrifying night in 1974. Apparently they were actually the only guests in the hotel for this night, which at any other hotel might be cool, but I feel like this is not what you want from a haunted hotel. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Rothschild Surrealist Ball. The Rothschild family is one of the wealthiest and most powerful families there has ever been. For years and years, there have been many rumors swirling about just how powerful and influential they really are, and there are some pretty crazy theories out there. In 1972, the family held a surrealist ball, which is where this photo is from. These photos could be potentially very innocent, but there is just something about these elaborate masks, coupled with the theories about what this family is really up to, that just make it feel very eerie. This party is one of the most legendary there has ever been, and whether or not they really are involved in shady dealings, that still is impressive. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Salem UFO. On the morning of July 16th, 1952, this photo was captured by Shell Alpert and has stumped people ever since. This photo shows 4 unidentified objects hovering in the air above Salem, Massachusetts, and was taken at the Salem Coast Guard Air Station. The objects seem to be above the Winter Island and Cat Cove areas, but there really isn't much more that is known about this strange incident. There were a few theories regarding this photo. One is a camera glitch, Others think it may have just been light reflecting off of the window that the photo was taken through. But of course, there are people who point to similar incidents that happened in the 1950s and of course believe it is proof of extraterrestrial beings. It is very likely we may never know exactly, but the air of mystery it leaves is definitely kind of cool. In our number 4 spot today, we have the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a stratovolcano located in Skamania County, Washington. The volcano is best known for its huge and disastrous eruption on May 18th, 1980. This photograph comes from photographer Robert Landsberg, who was of course in the area at the time of this eruption. Before the eruption, he had visited the area in order to photograph and document all of the changes that were happening. On May 18th, he was within a few miles of the volcano when it erupted. Since he unfortunately was located so close to the explosion, he knew that he would be unable to escape this disaster, so instead of focusing on the impossible, he focused on taking as many pictures as possible. Robert was obviously incredibly brave and dedicated, but also very smart. After snapping as many photos as he could, including this one, he then secured his camera in his backpack and covered his backpack with his body. He knew he was unlikely to survive, but wanted to make sure that these photos did. His body was found 17 days later with his backpack still underneath him. His film was of course developed and has provided geologists with some really valuable insights with his close documentation of the eruption. In our number 3 spot today, we have this burst of joy. You might be looking at this photo wondering how this extremely joyous photo could hold any dark secrets. Well, this photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and for a good reason. This photo was captured by Slava Vetter on March 17, 1973 at the Travis Air Force Base in California. The photo shows United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Sturm and his family. This was taken as he was being reunited with his family after 5 years of being held as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. On October 27, 1967, he was leading a flight of F-105 when he was shot down over Hanoi and held captive until March 14, 1973. I can't imagine what this must have been like for his family, because there was a chance that he could have not come home at all. The girl with her arms wide is his 15-year-old daughter, but the look on all of their faces truly captures the pure joy that they are all feeling. In our number 2 spot today, we have the frozen man of Mount Everest. This photo comes from 1996 and it shows Beck Weathers getting treated after the Mount Everest disaster. The Mount Everest disaster took place on May 10th and 11th in 1996, where there was a blizzard on the mountain that ended up stranding and taking the lives of 8 people who were aiming to descend the mountain. Beck was a part of the team who was climbing the mountain on this fateful day, and he ended up suffering from snow blindness during the climb. He actually fell into a hypothermic coma because it was so cold, and he suffered severe frostbite on his face, hands, and feet. Pretty miraculously, he not only survived, but ended up walking back down to camp in order to get help, where he was then taken by helicopter to receive treatment. He ended up needing his hands, part of his feet, and even his nose amputated, but he survived this whole ordeal, and that is the most important thing. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Dyatlov Pass incident. If you have never heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident, you better buckle in, because it is so terrifying. This photo was taken in February of 1959 as 9 young Soviet hikers set out to trek through the Ural Mountains. They had set up camp, and sometime during the night, something happened that made them cut their way out of the tent and all flee the site. Leaving in such a rush, they were of course underdressed for the bitterly cold weather, and 6 of them ended up passing away from hypothermia, which is extremely tragic. The other 3, however, is where this story takes a frightening turn. Like I mentioned before, no one knows why they fled the tent in the first place, and the last 3 hikers were found passed away with severe signs of physical trauma that no one could agree on what had caused it. In 2019, the investigation was reopened, and just last year there was a conclusion that a kind of avalanche called a slab avalanche was the cause of these injuries. Regardless of what happened, this whole incident was of course very tragic, but the mystery behind it definitely takes it to a spooky place.